If you're someone who's obsessed with World of Warcraft's Mythic Plus, you might be familiar with some of the system constraints that tie you down. World of Warcraft is an MMO first and foremost, and that means you're restricted by those systems. So what if all you wanted to do was run Mythic Plus without the constraints of an MMO holding you back? What would a system like that look like, and how could it be improved? Well, in today's video, we're going to be talking about the upcoming game Fellowship and how it takes the Mythic Plus gameplay loop and adds quality of life changes for a much better gameplay experience. If you're just interested in jumping straight into the gearing grind and you don't care so much about story or leveling up first, then Fellowship is the game for you. In Fellowship, there are no character levels. Instead, you will simply select the hero you want to play, and then all of your hero's progression instead is handled simply by running, well, more dungeons. When you first start playing, you will have the basic kit of your hero unlocked, which usually consists of about 9 abilities. But as you complete dungeons, you will progressively unlock talents and new abilities that further amplify your playstyle and kit. Speaking of progression, how do heroes feel to play? Every hero starts out simple with 9 buttons to press as a base toolkit. There's some complexity to these base kits, but it should be pretty obvious what the desired core gameplay loop for that hero should be. As you progress, you will unlock about 4 more core abilities, and these abilities can come in the form of crowd control, offensive cooldowns, defensive cooldowns, and perhaps some other core rotational abilities. However, as you progress, you will also unlock talent rows and points. These talents are very strong and have large impacts on your general game plan, to the point you really have to plan around certain talent choices to optimize your DPS. So the overall complexity in this game tends to come from talent choices rather than the hero's base kit. This is all to say that heroes are pretty easy to pick up in Fellowship, but they still have enough depth to keep you interested as you unlock more things. The next thing I want to talk about is the frustrations of having a randomized dungeon system. In World of Warcraft, when you're trying to raise your IO score or maybe farm for specific pieces of gear, you need to fish for specific keys first. And then when you get the correct key, you also need to time that key to get an increased score. Without being able to consistently practice these keys due to the randomized keystone system, increasing your IO score can be very frustrating and time consuming. Well, Fellowship has a dungeon system that lets you specifically queue for the dungeon you want, as well as random queue systems. When you have a complete party formed, you can select the exact dungeon and difficulty you want to try. This has a few perks. First, it makes farming for specific loot a little bit easier, although this is pretty minor due to other systems that I'll talk about shortly. Secondly, and more importantly, it becomes much simpler to practice dungeons and therefore increase your dungeon score. One of the biggest things that turns me away from Mythic Plus are simply the time commitments. I don't have a lot of time to run subsequent dungeons, which usually leads me to only really being able to do 1 or 2 dungeons before I need to hop off. As you might expect, this often results in me receiving 0 pieces of gear, so there's minimal progression done. This is because on average, WoW dungeons usually take anywhere from 25 to 30 minutes to complete. In Fellowship, there are 2 dungeon types, where the most common type are adventures, which are 1 boss instances. However, these adventures only take about 10 to 15 minutes to complete. The other type of content is actually called dungeons, and these are more of a 3 boss format, and they average 25 to 30 minutes, just like actual WoW's Mythic Plus. But that's not all. As I said, one of the most frustrating things about Mythic Plus is how you can sometimes go on loot dry spells where you simply don't get anything from your dungeon runs. Fellowship guarantees you receive loot from every dungeon you complete. Adventures will reward a single piece of loot, while dungeons reward 2 pieces of loot. You get this loot regardless if you time the key or not, so even if you're wiping a few times, there's still incentive to complete the key. Even if you don't need the actual loot you receive, you can still put it to use elsewhere, which leads me into my next point: item progression. Another one of the worst feelings in Mythic Plus is when you're farming a dungeon for a specific piece of loot, like a trinket, and you're getting to the point where you've done this dungeon a million times and you've acquired every single piece of loot that you're looking for but the trinket. What do you do with all the loot that you get that you're not planning on using? Likely you're gonna vendor it or disenchant it, right? It's not really something you're looking for. Well, in Fellowship, all loot has its uses, even if you already have a better piece in that specific slot. You see, the main way that you upgrade gear is through gold, which is a resource acquired simply by completing a dungeon. You then use this gold to upgrade pieces of gear, which increases their item level and their power. But you can also scrap gear and turn it into gold. So even if you acquire a piece of loot that you don't need, you can always turn it into gold to upgrade your equipped gear, making it much easier to progress your hero's item level. But scrapping gold isn't the only thing unwanted gear is used for. There are items in the game that can reroll loot called ingots, which come in 3 different rarities. You have a green rarity ingot, which just rerolls the loot into any random piece of gear that you can equip of the same item level and rarity. Then you have the blue ingots, which give you a list of 3 items to choose from of any random gear slot with the same item level and rarity as the rerolled piece of loot. And finally, you have purple ingots, which give you a list of 3 items to choose from of the same equipment slot. The next quality of life change is a quick one, and that's how Fellowship makes kicking and interrupting so much easier. Fellowship introduced a system where you can mark a target with a single button press. This will put your hero's icon next to the target's health bar. Then, whenever a cast is going off, you don't even have to target your mark. All you have to do is press your separate button that will use your kick on that marked target while you can continue your uptime on your current target. This just means that this is a focus macro with a kick macro built in, so it's so much simpler. You don't really have to make one from scratch. In addition, your hero icon indicates the cooldown of your kick ability to interrupt casts. When your kick is on cooldown, the circle will show the remaining cooldown of your kick. This single mechanic has made the game so much easier to coordinate kicks, especially in a large pack. If there are multiple casters, it's easy to simply press your kick mark button and let the other players assign themselves to other casters. The next thing I want to highlight is account progression. I mentioned before that no loot is useless because you can turn it into gold. Well, gold is also an account-wide resource along with upgrade materials and ingots. So if you have been spending all your time playing a single hero and you reach a point where you feel like your progression has been completed, you can take all that gold you've accumulated until this point and start a new hero. You'll be able to quickly buy catch-up gear on your alts and spend gold to upgrade them. And then on the flip side, if you want to play an alt character, maybe you have another group of friends that's just starting out playing, you can play on this alt character and still continue to acquire gold, which can then be funneled into your main character. So the general system is very, very alt friendly. There's even a vendor where you can buy gear from to jumpstart your fresh characters. In this final section, I just want to rapid fire a few changes that have made Fellowship feel very nice to play. You no longer have to worry about gear durability in Fellowship. No more of this having to worry if this next pull or wipe will cause your armor to break in the middle of like a Mythic Plus dungeon. You also get a free mount that can be used in all dungeons, so even if you're playing a character that doesn't have a lot of mobility, you don't have to worry about having a terrible run back. And speaking of run backs, there are campfires located throughout the dungeon which function as clear respawn points. You just simply interact with them and it sets that as your respawn point. And that's going to wrap up the quality of life changes you can expect to find in Fellowship. If you're a WoW Mythic Plus enjoyer, let me know what appeals to you most about Fellowship down in the comments below. But this was GooberTroy. Thanks for watching, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.